Predictions can be made as to what may happen when an errancy goes. It is historical fact that a less than total view of an errancy has resulted in a denial of some or all of the miracles of the Bible. Usually, Old Testament miracles are the first to be either denied outright or explained away as happening naturally rather than supernaturally. Often the attack is directed against the historical events recorded in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. That means that the accounts of creation, the sin of man, and the flood are denied as being historically and factually true, unquote. If the creation account goes out the window, then the entire evolution-creation controversy is all but abolished, and the evolutionists have prevailed. And if the flood is disproven, a lot of apologetic spokespersons are going to be walking around with egg on their faces. Third, Ryrie says that if an errancy is jettisoned, there will be a denial of the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch. Fundamentalists strongly believe that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And if in fact he is not the author, it weakens any adherence they may have to the book. Ryrie goes on to list other problems that would arise from an errant Bible. That's a Bible with mistakes. And concludes by saying, quote, "Inerrancy is a crucial issue. It is not a tempest in a teapot," unquote. Let me repeat that. It is not a tempest in a teapot. That's a very safe deduction considering the fact that Christianity and the Bible rise or fall on this issue. Other scholars have also noted the fallout from a discredited belief in inerrancy. In their book entitled "Does Inerrancy Matter?", 2 fundamentalists by the names of Boyce and Packer state the following on page 8, quote, "Those who undermine the truth of the Bible sometimes claim truthfulness for some parts of the Bible. These would be parts in which God has spoken, as opposed to other parts in which only men have spoken. But this position is unsound. People who think like this speak of biblical authority, but at best they have partial biblical authority, since the parts containing error obviously cannot be authoritative. What is worse, they cannot even tell us precisely what parts are from God and therefore are truthful, and what parts are not from God and therefore are in error. Usually they say it's the salvation parts, whatever they are, that are from God. But they do not tell us how to separate these from the non-salvation parts." Unquote, Boyce and Packer. A valid criticism of this kind is directed primarily at the liberal wing of Christianity. As I have often said during my media appearances, especially on the radio, how do you know what is true when you begin to admit certain parts are false? In a book entitled "A Defense of Biblical Infallibility," apologist Clark Pennock says on page 18, quote, "The surrender of biblical infallibility would be a disastrous mistake, having deadly effects upon the Church of God and its theology," unquote. One of the foremost apologetic authorities on the Old Testament, Professor Gleason Archer, stated the following on page 22 in his book entitled "A Survey of the Old Testament, an Introduction." Quote, "If this written revelation contains mistakes," of course he's referring to the Bible, "then it can hardly fulfill its intended purpose. That is, to convey to man in a reliable way the will of God for his salvation. Why is this so? Because a demonstrated mistake in one part gives rise to the possibility that there may be mistakes in other parts of the Bible. If the Bible turns out to be a mixture of truth and error, then it becomes a book like any other book," unquote. Again, the question arises, How do you know what is true when you begin to admit certain parts are false? Every book contains some truth, even if it's nothing more than the name of the author and the publisher. As Harold Lindsell correctly said on page 25 of his previously quoted book, quote, I contend that embracing a doctrine of an errant scripture, again, that's one with mistakes, will lead to disaster down the road. It will result in a loss of missionary outreach. It will quench missionary passion. It will lull congregations to sleep and undermine their belief in the Bible. It will produce spiritual sloth and decay and will finally lead to apostasy, unquote. An apostate being one who has gone off the well-worn path of what is supposedly accurate. So for these and other reasons, many biblicists cling to inerrancy at all costs. A significant problem that is increasingly confronting fundamentalists, however, is that a growing segment of their own membership has been repeatedly attempting to formulate a compromise on the question of inerrancy versus errancy. Increasing numbers of conservatives are no longer willing to deny the obvious existence of biblical contradictions and fallacies and have been leaving the ranks, so to speak. Needless to say, they have been soundly criticized. A good example of them being denounced can be found on page 165 in Lindsell's book entitled The Battle for the Bible. Rather than reading the text, I'll simply summarize its contents. Anybody who is reasonably well acquainted with Scripture knows that there is a mathematical falsehood in 2 Chronicles 4:2.